Hello, everybody. I'm Greg Forster with Karam Fellowship, and this is our latest member spotlight interview. This month, we are welcoming Dean Blevins from Nazarene Theological Seminary. Dean, thank you so much for giving us a few minutes.
It's a pleasure just being with you, Greg. So thank you for the opportunity.
It's been great collaborating with you in the network, in the community over the years. My first question for you is tell us about three things going on either at your school or in your field that are exciting to you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and it is kind of interesting. The first one I'll just kind of talk about is one that we've been involved in for a while, but has a wrinkle. So we're still continuing the work in entrepreneurship and the life of the church, and um, it started with our partnership with the Kaufman Foundation here in Kansas City, where the seminary is located, and we're still doing the Fast Track Education, their entrepreneurship education initiative, and gave us a chance actually to sort of platform ourselves within Kansas City. They have what I would call a week of celebration of entrepreneurship called Global Entrepreneurship Week in Kansas City. I think the Global Entrepreneurship Week's a framework that happens around the country, but Kansas City actually is a pretty good place because of Kaufman to bring a lot of people here, and we were able to host some workshops, and two of them in particular was entrepreneurship in the church, and the second one was on social venturing, this whole idea of the merger between for-profit and social entrepreneurship together, and a conversation with community development. And those were really rich conversations. But it gave me an opportunity to kind of also talk about the work in design thinking. So if you think about it inside entrepreneurship, I've really been working a lot in the whole concept of design thinking, but if you think of that as more of a pedagogy, kind of a thinking, learning process, we're finding it to be very helpful, particularly since it's oriented for people who have a bias toward action and they're working on problems where there is no solution yet. So they're actually, many times, the line in design thinking is we're trying to really find a good problem to solve. And how do we get there? And I'm finding a lot of ministers that's very attractive to them, where suddenly it's not, I have an answer and everybody follow me kind of thing, but how do we move forward? And it's actually important, I think, for educational institutions because rather than us showing up as content specialists to provide a curriculum to try to get churches to do, I show up sort of hands in my pockets and say, how might we solve problems that are based on where those churches are? And we're finding that a very interesting way of both teaching, but one way to think about it, actually, it's facilitation that leads to learning and new learning. So having an opportunity to kind of show that as a part of the Entrepreneurship Week has been important. So it's one big initiative. A second one, actually, just shift gears, is in the language of moral integration through virtue formation. So, the seminary over the last 4 to 5 years has been really involved in partnering with one of our undergraduate research universities, Point Loma Nazarene University, on how do we shape congregations through virtue formation, and particularly through a curriculum, if you will. So this one is a curriculum that experts have sort of put together that fosters a deep sense of care within members of the congregation. So the curriculum is designed to kind of walk people through six virtues, four of them pretty basic, developing a deeper sense of gratitude, a deeper sense of trust, sort of taking on the virtue of compassion and exercising the practice and posture of forgiveness. And then the other two, what we call metacognitive or larger sort of controlling virtues, would be a deep sense of empathy for others and a deep sense of self-awareness. Positive psychologists like the word mindfulness, but it's really just being aware, deeply aware of where you are. And so if you take those six together, the curriculum is designed to sort of inculcate within people a deeper love and care for each other. We've adopted the language of care just out of theory and the work of people like Eric Erickson, because love sometimes, though that to me, love still undergirds that, but care gives more concrete sense to it and a deeper sense of care for others. So it's got more of a relational component. I mean, you can use love in a lot of different ways, but care really seems to force people into a posture of really focusing on others. And it's been an interesting curriculum. The university was focused mainly on laity. We've been using it. Actually, we've inculcated it into our curriculum at the seminary for all of our seminarians, with the idea that the more deeply we shape pastors into a posture of care, the more they'll be attuned to then utilizing things like this curriculum in their local congregation. So it's a both and trying to lift up this key component of care. And then the last major initiative that I found myself sort of launched into came courtesy the Lilly Endowment Incorporated. They've got a major grant initiative that's really focused on children. And in that grant initiative, Lilly is looking at children through two lenses. One's parenting, but the one we're a part of is also through the life of the congregation and how we foster really spiritual experiences of children through worship and prayer practices. And so we took on that initiative. And then just because maybe it's my entrepreneurial heart or maybe I'm schizophrenic, I'm not quite sure why, but I thought it would be good actually to try that in two different settings. Lily was interested in diverse populations. So we're doing the initiative with one of our Nazarene groups of churches in Northern California, where there's I think I think last list was like 114 different expressions of ethnic and immigrant communities inside these churches, not just different churches, but sometimes different worship expressions or different micro populations. But we thought that's a very diverse community that really intersects with Pacific Rim, and we could learn a lot there and help churches that are a lot of times smaller congregations, not large ones, to engage in. But at the same time, we're doing worship and prayer practices out there. We're engaged in it also here in Kansas City with churches that are trying to do ministry for children with autism or autistic children, whether you use person first or identity first language. And that's put us in conversation with actually probably larger congregations that have disability ministries, but we're hoping to learn kind of how working with them, we might develop insights then that we can distribute out to other churches, even smaller churches. So in that grant, I'm able to use, yes, design thinking, because I am not an expert when it comes to ministry with autism, for instance. But we're using design thinking to come alongside congregations in their cultural context or larger congregations with very unique populations here in Kansas City. And the only overarching framework is this posture of care. So the first two initiatives, the design thinking and then the moral integration, Lily gave us the opportunity to do that with children in mind. And I think that keeps me busy. So at least keeps all three of them connected, but it's been a pretty crazy way of sort of managing those three different plates, and definitely the grant trying to work out of two different locations. It's been an exciting period of time. You think for a guy who is actually thinking about how he might plan his exit strategy into retirement, I've been taking on a whole lot of new sort of initiatives in areas that I don't have the expertise, but we're actually able to platform a whole new set of insights and learning. So I'm enjoying that.
Well, I don't want to become complicit in the culture of overwork and burnout that we have talked about recently in the fellowship. And yet, part of me wants to say, Dean, please feel free to continue delaying that exit strategy because we've been so delighted to see you thrive in this work. You know that we're all about this entrepreneurial mindset that says the solution does not yet exist. And what better description of the challenges facing churches and seminaries in the present day? And yet, combining that, I also love your language of care, that love expresses itself not only in care, but one primary way is in care. I think you've clearly thought well about that language. If we could bring those things together and pass them on to our children, that would sure be a big win.
Yeah.
Dean,
Yeah.
let me ask you my second question. And you've started broaching this in your answers to the first question, but how are big picture issues coming up in the classroom for you?
Yeah, I would say, and probably one way to think about it is that the whole initiative on care was a response to what's perceived as, I think, a major social issue today. So I always say that I would say this of any virtue, I always call it a penultimate virtue, not ultimate. I mean, so it just reminds me to stay humble that I don't have the answer. Educators are really bad at having a theory of everything and theologians are even worse. So, I mean, so I know I'm risking that every time I talk, but I do think it's a strategic and important virtue in our society. And in talking with our students, I think it's a posture that really helps them navigate the social environment our churches find themselves in, particularly here in the United States. So Arthur C. Brooks wrote a book, Love Your Enemies, that I think in it he says that we seem to be a society addicted to contempt. Which is an interesting posture to think about, and some of my own research now is trying to navigate both contempt and care. But in our classrooms, what we're finding is a lot of students who are passionate about certain subjects, but the danger is how that causes them, and it doesn't matter what subject it is, causes them to separate from people through if not explicit contempt for others, and at least a kind of subtle temptation toward contempt. You can name any social issue and you can name anything in the political culture right now. And we just seem to be, there's no middle. We just seem to sort of be divided. And it struck me and it struck the seminary through this curriculum that we're working with our own students. Could we help at least create, if not a common good, a common care that would bring people back together so that even in the midst of differences, our responses would always be laced with a kind of caring response. And so a part of it was really trying to bring that piece, and again, knowing we don't necessarily have the answers of what that would look like, but the design thinking, I think, is really a part of, at least in my courses, something that's speaking to students who don't necessarily have a foreclosed view of what their future looks like, and really needs permission to, even in their own calling, to be able to explore that and develop that outward. So both of these are really, to me, if we can create a climate of care, but we also say we don't have answers, but we sure would like to find them. Design thinking really does rely on collaboration and partnership. So it just seems to invite, once we have this posture of care, so just think about it that way, then can we move into a deeper sense of collaboration? And I believe that's important.
You know, when that Arthur Brooks book came out, Love Your Enemies, I said to somebody, boy, I wish I were brave enough to publish a book and call it Love Your Enemies.
I
That's
know.
gutsy. But
I'll just be honest with you again, and maybe it's part of that via media Wesleyan strain that I'm a part of. If I'm going, well, if you can't love them, can you at least have a posture of care? Can you at least care for someone enough that in the midst of differences, it would make a difference? I mean, and to me, the care language through the virtue formation concretizes a way of people to think about that. So that to me is really important.
and that common care implies a common good that we can discover
Yeah.
through those relationships. Well, there's so much more to be said about that. But let me ask you my third question. Tell us about an experience of collaboration, either one that you have been in recently and that went well, or one that you're looking forward to.
Well, it's a both and. So one that went really well, and this goes back to the grant. So I think one thing is that one of the real strengths a lot of times in philanthropy or the grant process is who it brings into a room together. And I know that from just personal experiences working with you in the past and the things that Karam form, and it's those crossover conversations. So right now, Lily's the convener, and when it came to the whole initiative around autism, trust me, this is not something that the Nazarene Theological Seminary saw themselves as experts in, but we saw it as a need, particularly one way to say it in the Kansas City area. And the way I often describe our seminary is that we have been a national seminary that happened to reside in Kansas City because our global offices were here and we were here to serve a national church. And so, if you think about traditional seminary life, you would have people who would sojourn to Kansas City, be here for 3 years, 2 or 3 years, and then sojourn back, sometimes back home or wherever they were really interested in serving afterwards. But this gave us a chance as a seminary to actually be a seminary for Kansas City, not just a seminary that happened to reside here, but could make a difference in our Kansas City community, and not just churches from the Church of the Nazarene in Kansas City. Um, so when we initiated this, we thought this will push us into a kind of common space, but we're coming in not as experts. As a matter of fact, we had to build a consultant team of people in disability ministries and people who worked with autism. And then when we got to the Lilly meetings, we were looking for people that we could partner with as well. So just recently, we hosted a guest lecturer, Dr. Leon Van Omen, who comes from the University of Aberdeen, and they have a center for the autism and theology there. And the way to get him here, even though we have a lot of grant money, we didn't have an inexhaustible amount, was we were able to partner with Baylor University. Dr. Eric Carter had recently arrived there to continue the work they have been doing in disability ministries. And between our partnership, we were able to bring in Dr. Van Omen, one, to first go to Baylor and then to come to Kansas City and return and share the expense, but also maximize his time here in the US and give him multiple platforms. And then bringing Dr. Van Omen here to NTS gave us the opportunity. His work has been on autism and worship. And again, our focus is in children through worship and prayer. It gave us a platform to reach out to churches in the Kansas City community to invite into our network. So we're right now, and it is a collaboration. I mean, so I hope you hear this language. It's a collaboration through the grant, through different academic institutions into the Kansas City area. And we're working with large churches. Most of them are large, not all, but they're representing both evangelical and mainline denominations. And what we're finding is as we bring these people together, that the place of children and the posture of care allows these congregations to sort of set aside some of their differences, both around theological frameworks and social posturing, for the sake of children, and definitely for the sake of children with autism. And we're finding a place where this is a lot of my previous history, where people who might not normally have a conversation across theological boundaries or because of social differences can find a place where they at least will suspend those long enough to really take on this very unique challenge. And we are seeing really creative responses out of it. So it's been a fascinating way of saying, can we find the right kind of topics or themes that people are willing to sort of set aside, really places where we've been in battles, and actually find ways of actually making difference. And
Right.
us working with, yeah, Nazarene's working with Baylor Baptist probably might be one example of that. But more importantly, I think having Baptist churches and United Methodist churches and Episcopal churches sitting down in a room and going, it really is about the kids.
Yeah, I was
As
going to
help,
say, helping with the challenges of the people who are most in need and marginalized tends to cut through a lot of that polarized static. And the
yeah,
other thing that stands out to me in what you've just shared is the importance of locality. I think Although we've been expecting to enter an era of mere globalization in which we do everything digitally and there's no locality, that ironically brings us back to the question, why this school, why this program, why, and being in a particular place really fills a lot of that in. Dean, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime, Greg. My thanks to you and the work that you're doing and the fellowship I just think is still crucial. So continued prayers to you and your efforts and endeavors as well.